thanks for joining us today for the launch of version 2 of the BIM for Housing Associations Toolkit. My name is Sue Butcher. I'm the Programme Manager for BIM for Housing Associations, and I'll be your chair for today. We're looking forward to hearing from some great speakers, and there will be plenty of time for questions and discussion later in the session. So let's take a look at the agenda. We're going to begin with a few words from Aman Sharma, who's Deputy Chair of the Building Regulations Advisory Committee. And then we're delighted to welcome Beth McDade from the Building Safety Programme at the HSE, who'll be talking to us about the Resident Engagement Panel. And then Jack Ostrofsky, Chair of BIM for Housing Associations, will introduce the toolkit and talk us through what's new in version 2. And then we're delighted to have with us Sue Wilbraham and Femi Olaiya, who are both users of the toolkit, and they'll be able to give their own perspective and have some tips for you. We've also allowed, with a bit of luck, 20 minutes for discussion and Q&A, and at the end we'll let you know what BIM for Housing Associations is working on now and how you can get involved. The session is being recorded and will be published on our YouTube video channel after the event, and we'll be sending you a feedback survey straight after the event. So please take a few minutes to let us know what you think. Okay, so we're hoping to be very interactive in this session, and we've enabled not only the Q&A within the webinar platform, but also the chat. So if you click on the Q&A box, you can ask your questions in there at any time. And the sooner you do, the better, because you'll be able to see the other questions and give your own answers if you have them, and also like the questions you want to upvote so that they come to the top and we're more likely to ask them to the panel. So let us know if you have questions, please put them in as soon as you think of them. We also have the chat feature, so I'm just going to put something in the chat so you can see it. If you open the chat box, there's a subscription link there for our YouTube channel. Okay. I'll be asking as many questions as we can during the call today, but we'll be asking everyone's questions later and answering them. So don't be shy, we want to hear from you. Last time we wrote an article and also put them on a forum in the form of an FAQ. So we'll do the same this time as well. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. Right, so without further ado, let me introduce Aman Sharma. Aman is Deputy Chair of BRAC, the Housing Ministry's Building Regulations Advisory Committee, which is playing such a key role in advising the Ministry, including publishing the Golden Thread report last summer. Aman, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you indeed for the invitation to be with you this afternoon. I'm delighted to be back speaking with this particular audience in this particular sector, a critical sector, for the development of the new safety case regime for higher risk buildings and the wider regulatory reform for building regulations too. For those who are unclear of what the Building Regulations Advisory Committee is, we are a statutory and independent body that has been advising the Secretary of State directly, and indeed ministers, on making and changing building regulations and for the general performance and safety of buildings. We are appointed by the Secretary of State directly through the public appointments process, and I found my way into the Building Regulations Advisory Committee shortly after the Grenfell Tower tragedy, being appointed to look after the Part B technical review and also to stand up and support the Golden Thread working group, which we'll come back to. An important point to note, of course, is that the Building Safety Act gives power to establish a new expert committee structure, which will transition over to the Building Safety Regulator and exist as a competency panel, a residence panel, and indeed a building advisory committee. And more information on that new expert committee structure will be forthcoming soon. I wanted to just revisit on a more positive note, which is not usually par for the course at events and webinars, the progress that has been made since that awful night in June 2017. I think it's important to reflect the scope and magnitude of the work that has gone into developing and embedding 2 acts in the Building Safety Act and the Fire Safety Act onto the statute books, shortly to be followed by some 33 statutory instruments that are currently being consulted upon. And I think we can find some information to post into the chat if anyone on the call is unaware of the live consultation document dealing with some of that secondary legislation. But also the host of standards and industry guides that have been either drafted or continuing to be drafted. And of course, toolkits, like we'll explore in greater detail today. I'm incredibly impressed by the order of magnitude of the work that has gone into the development of the version 1 BIM for Housing Association Toolkit. And it was indeed BIM for HA that recognised the importance of information management in the stand-up of a new regime for higher risk buildings, but indeed some of the treatments that will be required that came out of Dame Judith's review and her 53 recommendations. And I think the evolution of that toolkit is something that you will be deeply impressed by. I know I certainly am. It was back in 2019 that I was asked to take the deputy chair of the Building Regulations Advisory Committee and immediately asked by Dame Judith to establish the BRAC Golden Thread Working Group, recognising, of course, the importance of the Golden Thread to the new regime and indeed to overall information management across the built environment. This is important to note because at the heart of the new regime and indeed the heart of building regulations will be information management and also the processes by which we describe information management, commonly referred to, of course, as safety cases, which some of you may be familiar with already if you've come in from high hazard industries, an industry the HSC is deeply immersed in and has some significant experience in enforcing and in regulating too. But for a number in our industry, the concept of a safety case is still relatively new, but it is only the concept that is new, not the principle. Safety cases are well understood across parts of the built environment, and we are trying desperately to transition some of those principles and indeed the objectives over into the residential sector. But it is incredibly important to note that it's information management and the processes by which we manage information that will sit at the very center of that new regime, commonly referred to, of course, as the golden thread. So whilst I move on and before I ask to hand back over to Sue, it's important to note some of that early work that has happened in industry. Certainly this is work that we have highlighted in the BRAC Golden Thread report as being of value and significance when considering your early reform and the way that you can accommodate existing regulatory reform either taking place or going on to take place over the next few months and indeed a couple of years. The first thing that comes to mind, of course, is the UK BIM framework and the suite of standards that make up the framework that sets out best practice at an international level for information management across the built environment. We have there a host of British and international standards and indeed European norms in some instances that set out a good starter for 10 if we are indeed starting from a standing position on this. I also served as chair of BSI committee FSB 1/1/1, which recently drafted and published BS 8644 Part 1, which develops upon the concepts of golden thread for fire safety information, recognizing the challenges, of course, that the fire safety sector came up against, particularly highlighted within Dame Judith's review for information management. I also reflect on the work that the UK Housing Data Standards have done, who have, I know a number of your organisations have begun to adopt, and I absolutely welcome that. And of course, we come lastly to the toolkit itself. I do remember the early echelons of the development of the toolkit, and it was very clear to me that whilst this project was in concept, it would be something that would have significant value to your sector and indeed to your customers and residents respectively. As I say, information management is something that we are going to have to get extremely well versed in to truly enable the delivery of the safety case regime. And I sincerely hope that everyone on this call will help develop to future iterations of not just this project, but others associated to it to ensure that it is fit for purpose and delivers against its principal objective of making people safe in their buildings and continue to feel safe in their buildings. So thank you for having me. Sue, I'll pass back to you and I look forward to the Q&A session at the end. Thank you.
That's great, Aman. Thank you very much for your encouraging words and for providing some background for us. Okay, I'd now like to introduce Beth McDade. Beth works at the HSE as a policy advisor, leading on the residents' engagement as part of the in-occupational operation policy team at the Building Safety Regulator. I think that's right. So Beth's going to talk to us about residential engagement. Hello, Beth.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Sue, for that introduction. I agree, it's a bit of a mouthful, but yes, I'm a policy advisor at HSE, and today I will be talking a bit about HSE's resident engagement. So if we could have the first slide, please. Okay, so here we have the Building Safety Act, which hopefully some of you have heard of, but if you haven't, so the Building Safety Act received royal assent in April of last year, and it set up the new regulator, whose main functions are outlined here as leading on the delivery of the new regulatory regime, promoting competence for all buildings, and providing oversight for better managing risk using evidence. And what I think is really implicit in these 3 points is that there is a real need for a step change in attitude, behaviour, culture, and also performance across the entire built environment, and that does include residents living in higher risk buildings. And as the regulator, HSE, we hope that this new system will help us to rebuild people's confidence in the building safety system, which was unfortunately and perhaps rightly damaged following Grenfell. Next slide, please. So in terms of HSE's engagement with residents, a real seminal finding in Dame Judith Hackett's report, which some of you may be aware, led to this overhaul of the entire building safety system. A key finding was that residents needed to be placed at the heart, at the centre of this new regime. And so noting that resident engagement is really important to what we're trying to do. And so HSE is really relying on its previous experience of engaging with residents, and this has primarily been in relation to gas safety, asbestos, and Legionella. And as I've mentioned, this is very much to ensure that residents are placed at the heart, and we're taking a multi-layered approach to developing this, and this is something which I hope to go on to discuss in the later slides. But just to note now, we have been working closely with partners from across industry, wider government, and stakeholders and our residents panel to do this. Next slide, please. Thank you. And in terms of BSR's approach specifically, so as I've said, we want to put residents at the centre of the new regime, and this is something which is outlined in the Act, and it's very much a two-pronged approach. So on the one hand, we want residents to help us deliver on our resident-related functions, and on the other, we want to ensure that duty holders are able to comply with their responsibilities and duties under the Act. So to date, this has largely involved the work of our interim residence panel, and this is actually where I work most closely. And the interim residence panel has been really instrumental in helping us to inform our approach to engaging with residents, just to make sure what we are doing actually works and is suitable for residents and it's fit for purpose. Our residence panel has 14 members, and to date, they've advised us on numerous policy areas, but to name a few off the top of my head, our competence, communications, building certification, and our complaints process. And in terms of tying these two functions together, I guess our kind of view is that we're the regulator to ensure that duty holders comply with their responsibilities, and duty holders are obviously residents and APs alike. And then the residents panel is here to kind of steer that process and make sure that what we are doing is actually well targeted and effective. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have this kind of multi-layered approach, which I previously mentioned, and it kind of demonstrates the various ways we engage with residents, and the overall picture we're aiming at is safer residents. I'll just talk through a few of these in a bit more detail. So at the top, we have our Residents Insight Programme, which is an ongoing piece of work within BSR HSE, and it kind of helps us build understanding of the demographics of our residents, current issues facing them, safety concerns, any barriers to engagement, and general communication habits. And that is, well, to date, it's been a really useful process in kind of informing how we develop our engagement. And I hope this will continue throughout the lifetime of the BSR, kind of making sure our engagement is effective. And then that goes down into the three kind of stages of our comm strategy. And we tend to deliver and plan to deliver our communications to residents through a combination of PR and media, partnerships, resident influencers, and direct contact with residents. And below that, we have our overall comms strategy, which involves sentiment tracking, and that will take place throughout the lifetime of the Act. And that kind of allows us to temperature check with residents, how people feel the BSR is doing, what their perspectives are, how we could better engage. And then below that, we have our various resident groups. So we began with the resident engagement the resident engagement group. We now have our interim residents panel, whom I work closely with. And in the near future, we're hoping to develop our statutory residents panel. Now, what is stated in the name of the statutory residents panel, that is a duty to set it up, which is statutorily mandated in the Act. And the purpose of that panel is to help us advise on our building related functions, but also we have a duty to consult that panel when we are issuing guidance or revising regulations. And then below that, we have our engagement with accountable persons and their engagement with residents through the resident engagement strategy, which forms a part of that safety case, which has previously been mentioned. And I guess further work is currently underway in collaboration with our residents to make sure that what we are developing is something that really will work for accountable persons and residents, because at the end of the day, we do want this all to work, and more engaged residents is safer residents, as you can see from the diagram. And then in terms of residents directly, so this will be mainly engagement through around refurb work. So as the BSR, we need to decide how the requirements of the building regs on the one hand interact with these new requirements of the safety case. And we want basically to ensure that residents are able to procure safe refurbishment services in their homes that don't negatively impact the safety of their buildings. And so it will be really important that we engage with residents around refurb work. And then below that, we have the BSR complaints procedure, which we are currently developing. And we want to enable residents to be able to report certain concerns directly to the BSR. So for example, if an accountable person has failed to kind of rectify a safety matter, or there's an issue of urgent concern, we think it's really important that a resident should have that process and feel comfortable and be able to report these concerns directly to residents. Next slide, please. And here we have, well, as you'll see, I've titled the slide a forward look, but if you look at the dates, maybe that was incorrect, but I'll not talk you through all of these dates, but this is kind of where we've come from in terms of our resident engagement and kind of near future plans. So where we're at the minute, we undertook in July some planning for the statutory panel, and that was very much a process, and it began with speaking to other regulators, other bodies in industry, residents themselves, to kind of find out what works for existing resident panels, what doesn't work, how we could take those learnings on board for our own panel. And that has kind of resulted in us having our current plan for the statutory panel, which we've decided in combination with our interim panel. And we're hoping to stand up the statutory panel from December of this year. Recruitment will be being undertaken for the statutory panel from October, as I said. And if you are interested in joining the statutory panel, I would really encourage you to get involved. Details of the recruitment will be publicised using the HSE e-bulletin, which if we just go on to the next slide, you can see details of how to get involved. So the recruitment will be publicised on the e-bulletin, but also other matters related to the BSR. And below where it says to sign up on the slide, that is actually a hyperlink, and in the chat as well. Thank you, Sue. So if you do want to get involved, I would encourage you to sign up to the e-bulletin and do so. But that is all from me. Thank you very much. I hope that was useful. And if there's any further questions, I'll be sticking around for the Q&A. So yes, please ask away. Thank you.
Beth, very interesting, and I definitely think that there's potential to look at resident engagement from an information management point of view. I know we've had at least one question about it already, and I'm sure there'll be some more. So thank you very much for that, Beth.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, into the meat, I'd like you to introduce Jack Ostrofsky. Now, those of you who don't know him, Jack's chair of BIM for Housing Associations, and he's held many roles. He began in contracting, and then asset management, and then fire risk assessment, and then development. And he's now head of quality and design at Southern Housing Group. And Jack's going to tell us about the toolkit. So over to you, Jack. You need to put your mic on.
How's that?
Yes, can hear you now.
All right, Bluetooth issue. Now that we've overcome that, hopefully that will be our only technical glitch of the day. But I'd also first like to thank Aman and Sue for their introductions. And of course, we don't have a lot of time today, so let's get into the toolkit. And if you could go on to the next slide, please. So Aman's described, the sort of is when you drill down into, I think, the first level. It has the potential to change how buildings are designed, built, and managed. So one of the key things to take away from that very simple diagram on the left is that the asset management phase, the operational phase, is in concept 3/4 of everything that you have to do with the building, and is probably more. What the UK BIM framework does is it breaks down the information management process into thematic areas, and has really clear protocols on how you can move information, how you can develop information and move it across. And I think one of the primary things around the framework is that it asks you to think about what you need first and then translate that into specific contractual requirements. And that applies to everything. Now, the infrastructure areas of the country are using BIM in a much more prolific way than a lot of other parts. But what the point about that, mentioning that is that it's applicable for everything in the built environment, including us in housing associations and overall residential sector. So what we've done in the toolkit in the first iteration is that we've taken the UK BIM framework and fleshed it out. Put some meat on the bones that is specific to the housing sector. So if you go to the next slide, please, Sue, thank you. This is all available in the toolkit. You're not going to be, it's obviously too detailed there for anybody to try to digest, but there's the specifics around what we do in housing associations. And one of the things that I think was really successful in the collaboration with the first version of the toolkit that we've developed and evolved into further along in this one is we've taken the asset information requirements. If it's useful and deployable, and if you need to certify it, replace it, or check it, there's a list that's been cross-referenced from approximately 15 housing associations, and then it's gone through another iteration with other people inputting and refining, and there's a clear set of asset information requirements. It's probably one of the most important pillars within this toolkit. If you go to the next slide, so this is the top slice of those 6 boxes, and we're going from high-level detail into a little bit more detail. Everything there's, like I said, in the toolkit for you to do your own analysis, and a lot of people have been using it, and we'll be able to talk to some people who have deployed it. But the information management point starts with, what does your organization need? And one of the areas where we're pivoting towards as a sector is ESG, environmental social governance, and things like the sustainable reporting standard. That's a great example of your organizational information requirements. But there's probably one of the best collections of the organization information requirements is the UK Housing Data Standards, which was another collaborative effort that articulates almost everything that we need to do as a housing association, and has very structured and therefore transferable approach to describing the information that you need. Asset information is a lot more simple, I think. I'm a building surveyor and a technical manager, a specifier. Asset information is the drawings, the documents, and crucially the data that we need to manage our assets. And data, I don't think I'll be preaching to the, I think I will be preaching to the converted, rather, is that it's more and more and more important. One of the things that I think a lot of our organizations are engaged with is getting ready for our social housing decarbonization funds. And if you're at all involved with that, you are wading through different data and finding data anomalies. BIM is one of the things that will help improve that particular thing. One of the things that we've been doing across the sector within my organization, a lot of people I've spoken to that have used the toolkit, is that we've taken these asset information requirements that, they're pretty clear, they're pretty robust, and we've put them in our development contracts, and we are now receiving structured data. And what we haven't generally have in place is some place to put all that structured data. and that's the asset information model. Now, in a conceptual way, the asset information model is all of the spreadsheets, all of the software systems, your cyclical work software, your repair software, your tenant management, customer relationship management. And what is really clear in the new regulatory regime is that we need to have a single source of truth. It needs to be proportionate, so we don't have things that we can't use, that we can't redeploy there, but it has to be accurate. And the relevance of it for residents is that it needs to be understandable and simple for us who manage the building, so we can translate that and communicate that in a way that is understandable, simple to residents, so they can feel safe in their buildings. And all those things that I just mentioned, feel safe in the buildings, single source of truth, that's the new law. So this is where BIM, I think, is really important. Now on to the things that's new in the toolkit. So we've updated the guidance document and the little intro of what's in the box and how to use it. What we've also updated is those asset information requirements and the COBE spreadsheet of asset information, which we'll talk about in another slide in a little bit more detail. And there's some brand new things in this, and that's the asset information model. That is a really, really significant piece of work that we'll talk about in a second in a little bit more detail. And then there's going to be a little bit more on the asset data dictionary. So let's go on to the new and exciting thing, the asset information model. So the conceptual definition is here. I think it's really, really good. It's everything that you need to support your strategic and your day-to-day asset management processes. And it's the information that's managed in a systematic way. I think we're missing a W there. Never mind. That's not important. The important thing is that what is this asset information model? And it is a blueprint for building and component data. And let's just rewind really quickly, Sue, to that conceptual definition. Even though that's a really short sentence, it is a very big piece of data, information, and drawings. I think that when I look at it, I sometimes get a little overwhelmed by trying to describe what underpins that. So if you go forward again to that blueprint, what the first thing is to explain is that this isn't a piece of software. It is a data model, and it is the blueprint for you or for the sector or for a software provider to create a system that can discharge the obligations for the golden thread and create that single source of truth. And I'll describe very quickly a little bit more on how that happens. Just a bit of an overview on the next slide, please. So before we go on into what it is, I think it's really important to mention again that this is the result of a collaborative effort. So BIM for Housing Associations brought, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, Sue, you can remind me, but I think we had about 20 to 25 people in each one of 5 focused 3-hour workshops. And we had people from all sorts of different functions from within housing associations, people who manage fire risk, people who do data, development. And
asset management.
And absolutely, asset management. That was one of the biggest sorts of cadres of people that we had in there. So Southern Housing Group, they created this data model and then presented it to this group of people, and everybody kicked it around and made a lot of really constructive suggestions. And there wasn't, I think, a single thing that wasn't constructive, that wasn't said. And all of those changes were incorporated in the model and taken back and made good by the data programming team. And now all of that work has been given away for free, facilitated by DataClan. I know that a lot of people who might be on this call participated in that, but I didn't go and ask for your permission to use your logo. But all those efforts were just really what made this thing valid. Now, a little bit more about what it is in detail. There's 7 sections in the model. And if you are managing assets, I think that a lot of these things are going to really start to resonate of, oh, this is really useful stuff. This is practical stuff. For me, with my BIM sort of nerdy hat on, I think the most exciting thing for me is the spatial hierarchy. And that's what identifies the buildings, the parts of the buildings. And that's how we are bridging the gap between data and the physical asset. There's a structured approach. It's a recognized structural approach. It is the one that is used by your development teams. It is used by the UK Housing Data Standards. It is a reflection of COBE, and that's what makes it so powerful as a tool to communicate data from the built environment into your asset information models with accuracy. And it breaks down into components and systems. So it classifies everything that we have control over in every part of the buildings and how they interact. It's a flexible framework, but there's already most of the things that we need to be working with or on from the work from the UK Housing Data Standards and from the BIM for Housing Associations. That's already built into the model. So there's not that much that needs to be populated in that regard. There's a spatial reference that is tied to the spatial hierarchy. There's also the works orders. That is all the codes were drawn by the UK Housing Data Standards in part of the model. Relevant parties. This is such a, sorry, I skipped the component actions. And what is component actions? What does that really mean? That's about your planned preventive maintenance or your checks for a fire door. What do you need to do with it? It needs to be part of a fire risk assessment or whatever is relevant to that, your CP12 for your boiler. All your component actions, that's already built into that model. Now, I jumped ahead into relevant parties, and this is really about the competency. Now, there's nothing in a computer program that can validate competency, but the asset information model has provisions to track who did the work and when they did it and what sort of qualifications they may or may not have. So you can't validate the competency, but it has provisions to record it. So the other part, the final part, is the documentation. And that's your PDFs, your operations and models, and can make and does make reference to any relevant drawings. So if you go to the next slide, this isn't really, I don't think we have time to go into this, but I just wanted to include this to show how the spatial hierarchy that's embedded into that asset information model is illustrated. So, the Southern Housing has an estate building core structure in our asset information software that we're already using, and it's mapped across to the AIM hierarchy. And what we've done is created a little bit more detail for floors and spaces within rooms within the new asset information model. You can use that or not, but that's something that you can drill down into on some of the other resources that we have available. I think I might be running out of time. That's probably why.
No, it's in the toolkit. I just wanted to remind people that the document, the Southern Housing Group spatial hierarchy, is explained in a separate document in the toolkit. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that's really important to point out is that this is how we do it in Southern. And some of the collaborators on some of the projects, they do it differently because they have a lot of extra care units, and then they have houses of multiple occupancy, and they will have a different spatial hierarchy that's relevant to the way that they do business. And that's not an obstacle, because the asset information model has inbuilt mechanisms to adjust for that. So when you get something from your development supply chain, was very, I think, quite strict way of doing things, that can be mapped very easily across. So now onto the summary. It's a blueprint. It's for a data platform to systematically support your strategic and day-to-day asset management processes. So that's a textbook definition of your asset information model. But I think that a more practical way to look at it is I always use Kipling's 5 Honest Men when I look at something that might be a little bit challenging or a little bit conceptual: who, where, when, and why. So if Sue, you could go and illustrate that for me. Why would you do it? Is, well, I think the most compelling reason is that it can help enable you to comply with your golden thread requirements and give you that single source of truth. But you know, the building safety regime is really, I think, the catalyst to compel us as organizations to manage our data better. And I wouldn't probably be accurate to say these are collateral benefits. These are the real benefits that you'll be able to manage your information better. And one of the other things that what motivated us to share this with the sector is that we want everybody to up their game. And I think that Sue's going to talk about this. Sue Wilbraham will be talking about this a little bit more when she talks about how she's used the toolkit. But basically, there is no solution that we can buy to deliver the single source of truth. We can't take something off the shelf and use it. So we want the software providers to please take a look at this, because this is a very clear, robust articulation of single truth requirements. And I know that some organizations are already implementing the asset information model. They couldn't be here today, but that's besides the point. So that's the big thing that's part of the toolkit. But I did mention before that we were going to talk about some of the updates that we did to the asset information requirements and the COBE update. So when we first started the toolkit, and we got together, I think, wow, it's so long ago, because, you know, the intervening COVID kind of did a Control-Alt-Delete in everybody's lives. But it was well before that, and it was really shortly after Grenfell that we embarked on this journey. And then there was a previous UK the BIM framework. It was what we call 1192, and some of the things that we started at that time didn't comply, weren't really aligned with the current, the new 19650. So we've done a really robust and I think forensic update of our asset information requirements and updated the COBE so it is quote unquote compliant. I think it would be more accurate to say you don't really comply with the UK BIM framework, you get yourself aligned to it. Compliant, aligned, doesn't matter. We've done a lot of work, and the UK BIM Alliance gave us a lot of their time. And some of the key authors of 19650 donated hours and hours and hours of their precious time to make this toolkit better. So we're very grateful for that. And now that's here for the benefit of everybody to use. And there's a new number and types of components. There's instruction structure, and it was audited and reviewed by, I think, not sure if we asked Nick if we could say that, but if you do know Mr. Nisbet, he's one of the foundation experts in this area, and you know his comments were extremely valuable, and we've taken those things on board. So it's new, it's better, and I think one of the best things about it is this is actually a bit more smaller, it's more concise, and that means that your costs when you instruct it to your development supply chain come down even further. So that's the final thing on that particular slide. These are all the folks that have been working on it, on the new toolkit. We've got a lot of contributions from a huge amount of people, and we're really grateful for that. It is a very much collaborative effort, and that's why it's, I think, valid for use. It's by housing associations for housing associations. It's been a real privilege to be at the center of all of this, and you know, everybody's participated in it. I know that have learned a huge amount from each other. So really grateful for everybody's contributions.
I think that's the last slide of your bit.
I hope so. I'm thirsty.
Okay, thanks very much, Jack. We'll see you in the Q&A briefly. So I've put a link in the chat to download the toolkit, and I know we've got some questions already in, which is wonderful. And you just go to the NHF website, housing.org.uk/BIM for HAs. And then we have a landing page there, and at the bottom there are 3 buttons. You can download the toolkit there, but also you can use the button in the middle to join the forum, which is our Teams forum, where you can ask questions and share ideas with a community of over 300 housing professionals. And I know quite a few of you have asked to join the forum when you apply to come on this webinar. So thanks for that. We'll be adding you in. Okay, so now we're going to hear from two members of the BIM for HA's community. Firstly, here is Sue Wilbraham, Building Information Manager for Safer Buildings at Metropolitan Thames Valley. Thanks, Sue. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Sue Wilbraham, Building Information Manager at MTVH. Can I have the next slide, please, Sue? MTVH are part of the G15, which represents London's largest housing associations, and our CEO is currently the chair. We have a focus on London and the Midlands, and as you can see, 49.5% of our properties are in London. We were formed after Metropolitan and Thames Valley Housing joined in October 2018, and in total we own, manage or administer around 57,000 homes. By far the majority of our homes are rented at 57%, followed by shared ownership at 15%. And due to the fact that we have such a large presence in London, it's clear that we have a fairly high number of HRBs, and our obligations under the Building Safety Act are significant. Next slide, please. Our development department really bought into BIM early on, and I have to confess that I can't take any credit for it. When I joined the organization just after a year and a half ago, they had already procured their new pipeline projects with BIM in place. They had defined the scopes of services and included them in the appointment and contract documents. They had defined the organizational and asset information requirements, and they procured 3D models and COBie data for all our 80 meter plus buildings. They have been impressive in their speed and enthusiasm. But although they got buy-in from areas of the business that were directly affected by what they were doing, it became obvious that the entire organization was not at the same point in the BIM journey. We also had the added challenge of having to consolidate 2 different legacy processes and software systems for everything that we do, because we're still grappling with full integration after our merger. Yet despite all the existing software that we had at our disposal, we couldn't find one that could cope with the granularity of data that we had in our test COBie data sets. Next slide, please. So with the knowledge that thousands of lines of data were edging ever closer to being delivered to us, we feverishly worked with our IT department to develop a bespoke database that we could use as a tactical solution until a long-term fix is developed by our asset management software provider. I can't really speak too much about the technical aspects of the database. All I really did was ask our IT guys tell our IT guys what we needed, and they ran with it. IT developed a database that feeds into our data lake, which is Snowflake. It's searchable and updatable via an interface in Samarkey, and has managed change control and auditing built in. And the best bit for us is that because the data is stored in Snowflake, which is our single source of truth, we can run clever Power BI reports on it, allowing us to display important components in our building safety management dashboards. This will give our building safety managers an oversight and understanding of our HRBs in a way that it's simply never been possible before. The building safety management dashboard view also makes the information easier to engage with because it's selected information displayed in a structured way. When this whole process started, we were looking for a quick short-term fix to a fast approaching problem, but now we have an efficient solution. And to be honest, software providers will have to come up with something pretty good to beat it, which is just as well because we're anticipating that it will take 2 to 4 years for them to roll out their COBie module. I think it's fundamentally important to remember that for our in-scope buildings, this is the best way we have of managing our golden thread. And by this, I mean a way to record changes to components so that our systems are current and up to date. And the information gives us a clear, and importantly, it gives us a clear understanding of spatially located components and the key details and documentation that pertain to them. Obviously, for legacy buildings, we don't have the luxury of building information models or COBie level data. And so we are retrospectively creating COBie along with renderings of the buildings to enable spatial placement of components. We're looking at point cloud scans, 360-degree photos and mapping to build a full and detailed understanding of our in-scope buildings. It's a lot of work, but we think that it's crucial as this information forms the backbone of our building safety cases. We've learned a whole lot about our buildings, non-compliance issues, safety risks, problems with our systems and our processes along the way. But ultimately, this learning has led us to improvements, and it's focused our minds on safety in a way that can only benefit these buildings and their components. Thanks, everyone, and I'll hand back to Sue.
Sue, thanks for that. I'm sure people will want to ask you about it. And finally, please welcome Olufemi Olaiya. Femi is a BIM lead and architectural design manager at Portsmouth City Council. And Femi, can you turn on your mic? There we go. Are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, everyone. Can we go first slide, please? My name is Femi Olaiya, just as Sue was introduced. I've got a background in architecture. I work for Portsmouth City Council, and I've been there for about 10 years now. So I've worked in 3 different capacities. I've worked as a facilities manager, an architectural design manager, and now the BIM lead for the last 4 years. So outside of work, a photographer. Can we move to the next page, please? And at Portsmouth State Council, I work for the Regeneration Directorate, which has about 400 staff and 7 services, which my department and team is one of the 7 services. So we offer BIM services and development within the council, and we're looking for how we would be able to use technology and a more enhanced process to optimize how we work. And this ties predominantly into our corporate priorities as the council, which is to drive growth within the council, to enhance cultural development, and to make Portsmouth a great city to live in and work. And this also ties greatly into delivering properties for our quota, which is about 18,000 properties by 2036. And we didn't have an option but to see how we can leverage on technology to deliver this. And this is how BIM came into the picture. And can we go to the next slide, please? And with Portsmouth City Council already has an established way of working that's within the property development team and all other departments that work on the planning, design, and delivery of assets. So due to this disruption with technology, our approach is to come up with a 5-phased strategy, which is to implement BIM on our already existing processes. So we've been able to come up with capability assessments to understand our performance gaps. So our approach is to plug BIM into our already existing processes. And currently we have 3 live projects, and we've got more projects coming up. And can we move to the next slide, please? And lastly, the BIM for Housing Toolkit has been really instrumental to how I've been able to engage people within the council. And because the mandate was to implement BIM on an organizational level, which is going to trigger a lot of change within the whole of the council and departments. So I always look for resources to help me out. And when this came out, this was really instrumental to how I approach things. And the 2 documents that I've really used are the scope for BIM services, which has helped me win more work. And what this has done is it helps me break down the roles and responsibilities and approach to work based on the river plan of works, which everyone fully understands. And this has helped us win more infrastructure work, which will be coming up from next year. And one of them is the Portsmouth International Port Project. And the other one is every time we talk BIM within our organization, there's always this question of how do we balance the existing assets with the new ones? Because we have over 17,000 assets currently. And how do we balance that? And this document has helped me form a basis for a conversation around that to help them understand how we can harvest information, how we can do a scan to BIM, how we can successfully embed asset information requirement at the front end of the project. So when we hand over, we can have a smooth and a well-optimized operation of that asset when people start to live in them. So in a nutshell, that's my experience with the BIM for Housing Toolkit. And I'll be exploring the spatial hierarchy one after. I feel that's a very interesting document within the toolkit that needs to be looked into as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Femi. It's now time for our Q&A session, so I'll ask all the speakers to turn on their cameras and unmute, and then we can have a look at some of the questions. Okay. Remember, the Q&A panel is the 2 speech bubbles there, and you can also use the chat box if you want to. Okay, now where to begin? Some people have been already answering. There we go. Some questions. We had a chap called Mustafa who's asked about a research project, and I know several people have volunteered to help him, so that's marvellous. Thank you very much for that. Now I've got a question here. Since the Hackett review, are you able to say how many housing associations have started implementing BIM for their existing housing stock? I wonder if Aman has got any views on that, and perhaps Jack as well.
I can jump in. I think Aman's probably unmuting himself, but nobody's tracking that. I know of some, from BIM for Housing Associations, there's quite a few. I think there's been 1,000 downloads of the toolkit. I don't know exactly the number, but it's close to that. That's obviously not going to be 1,000 housing associations, but we are going to be exploring how we can capture that. But I don't know. Maybe Aman has a little bit more of a finger on the pulse of things.
There is some data being tracked within other governmental departments, but sadly it's not as granular as tracking, specifically the uptake or use of building information modelling in the housing association sector, as you can imagine. That's partially down to how the framework was funded, of course, with part funded by Bays and other departments too. What's interesting actually as an interconnecting piece to that though is, like Jack, I can only really provide anecdotal evidence to the application of some of these processes that we've just explored over the last hour or so, that developers in particular, including HAs, are taking across their portfolios. So not just for HRBs, but recognising that there is still a vital clause within the Building Safety Act that scope can change very easily, and the intention is for it to change over time, a significant period of time, but time nonetheless. And when it does, I'm really pleased to see a number of organisations taking a really pragmatic approach in recognising the value of cascading these processes across their entire portfolio with a degree of proportionality, of course, Sue, but nonetheless recognising the need that, at a point in time, if we don't start planning and implementing these processes and gaining the benefits from BIM in general across our portfolio, then we're just kicking that proverbial can down the road.
Absolutely, and it's obviously something that people are concerned about, this issue, because we've had a couple of other questions about it. Like, for example, is the toolkit designed in a way to accommodate buildings at all levels or applicable across the whole housing stock? And I would say it is, because it's an information management system. It doesn't have to only apply to high risk buildings. Obviously there's an additional benefit for that. Don't know if anyone wants to add that to that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's too bad that Gary Bellinger, who cannot be here, he's one of the asset managers that we have within BIM for Housing Association, but we completely see this in this very, very same way, is that, and I'm sure that Sue will probably agree, and probably Femi as well, and Kirsty, I don't know, everybody in the panel is invited to say, I think first and foremost that implementing BIM, and I think you need to do that to get your single source of truth for your high-rise residential buildings, just isn't economically feasible And the other benefits from it is that you're going to be able to manage all of your assets better. The toolkit it's agnostic as far as building height. It doesn't care. I think the obvious place to start is where you need to do it. And then it is readily expanded across. And when in our development program, when we have even small infill projects, we do BIM light. We don't need to do a lot of building services information because, it's a boiler or it's an air source heat pump. There's no heat network, for example, but it's equally applicable. What we want to do is get automated data handed over from one part of the building's life cycle into the next part and keep it updated.
Don't know if anyone would like to add anything to that. I shall pick up on another question that we've had, which is from Mark, who's a consultant. He asks, how as consultants do we approach our client building owners to implement the toolkit? Who would be the best person to speak to? I wonder, I know some of you, I know Kirsty's worked on the consultant side and also on the client side. Do you have any views on who to talk to in that situation?
Yeah, so just briefly, my original background, I worked at an architectural practice before I moved over to the client side. So I've kind of sat on both sides of the benches, as it were, having to tender for projects that have had sometimes asked for BIM, sometimes not asked for BIM, sometimes vaguely in between, and then also on the client side of instructing it. It is a very important conversation to have. It's very difficult as a consultant to tender and complete projects if you don't actually know what your clients want. I'd say from my experience from a consultant side, the people that we generally tried to talk to initially was the development managers, because they are running the projects and they need to understand what they're asking for. But I think from a broader sense, from a broader organisational sense, it's the asset management side that really need to be instructing these requirements from the outset to then feed into the development. So maybe start with the development managers, but then go beyond that and try and sort of get higher up into the organisations. I don't know if Jack wants to add on to it from
I think
perspective.
I can comment, from my own experience when I was writing a business case for BIM when I was in the development part of the business, and some of my colleagues and one of the directors said, "Why isn't asset management doing this? It's their information," and they were too busy. And so there's a whole sort of ad hoc or anecdotal narrative there. And that's why one of the reasons why we formed BIM for housing associations. But I think you're right, Kirsty, is that you still need to be having those conversations with asset management. And I think, hopefully what we can work together on is increasing the knowledge and articulation. I think, for example, we've got Femi here, who's been doing a lot of that work. And I know that part of Femi's background includes facilities management. And, maybe you could add a little bit to this as well. Like, if you were selling BIM or buying BIM, who's part of that conversation?
For me, I think the asset management team is the icing on the cake for BIM, because that's where you actually start to reap the benefits of all the data you've been collecting from the very beginning. And in my experience, they're also the most difficult to get hold of, because they already have an established way of working, and most of them don't really want to change that. And selling BIM to them to make them understand how important that is to let them understand the returns on investment if they adopt that process. And in my presentation, that's why I mentioned we're plugging BIM into an already established way of working. So that way, it doesn't put them off. And also with the advent of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, we have lots of high-risk assets currently, and I'm sure most property owners are in this situation as well. And that's another good selling point to push BIM now. The Building Safety Act now can help us push it a lot more, and everyone sees why they need to do that. And from the last time I met with Jack, the progress I've made now is I'm talking a lot with the fire safety officer now, which I couldn't do before. And because of the Building Safety Act, the conversation is now more fluid, and we're looking for ways to see how we can integrate a structured data collection process into our current document management system. So I think that's where we are now, and I think the basis for it is using the Building Safety Act as a selling point for now.
I'd like to...
Yeah, just really quickly, Sue, sorry.
Yeah.
I think all those little bits and pieces to answer who should you speak to is, I think, my advice to somebody on the consultancy side, get to know your client very well and understand that housing associations are big, complex animals with a lot of different functions that will benefit or obstruct BIM. So to get a set of tailored messages together to that building safety team, to that fire safety team, to that asset management team, to say, BIM's actually going to be useful to you in this way. That's my thoughts on that. But back to you, Sue.
That's it's great, because we've had several thinking about what Femi said about plugging in to your existing systems and selling it. We've had a lot of questions of various sorts about software. And some have simply been, what software platforms do you recommend? But also, does the panel advocate housing associations having their own common data environments? If so, are there any recommended providers? Are there any applications for planned investment and retrofit work? And they may not be talking about applications, actually. They might be talking about applications, but quite a few software questions. So could you say a little something about recommending software?
Yeah, there are a lot of good, interesting products out there, and the usual suspects, I think, are they're asking about this. I know some of the platforms that we use, they've taken the toolkit and they're analyzing it. But one of the things that we've been very trying to be pure about within BIM for housing associations is that we aren't speaking directly with software providers in our workshops, and we're not recommending anybody. What we're asking the software providers to do is engage with what we're doing and take it away, and please listen to this client voice. It's not just one client. This is a collection of clients that have gotten together, and we've articulated what our requirements are. So if you want to win some business, I think if you came back and says, I can deliver this hamburger according to this recipe, well, it's lunchtime, so maybe that's where my analogy is coming from. But, so no, we don't do that. And we don't have anything to say, good or bad. Other than, I think what Sue was saying before, nobody can deliver right now. There isn't a single source of truth per solution. You want to show up at the Dragon's Den with that, you're going to walk away with some investment, I think.
If I could just add to that as well, because Jack raises a really good point, and I think he briefly alluded to it too, and it's a really important message that I hope everyone still left on the call will take away. It's just to beware of those promises of the enterprise software solution in this space. There is a lot of market movement coming in the form of promotional material through webinars, et cetera, that my colleagues in government are very much tuned into, that have the potential to disrupt the development of the policy at its very critical stage that it's at now. Essentially, that's me saying that if something's looking a little bit too good to be true in terms of an enterprise solution in this space, it most definitely will be. And I would encourage you to seek some extra guidance and support and by the sounds of it, nearly everyone on this call would qualify as being able to provide that. But if in doubt, certainly do ask peers and your other colleagues within your networks as to whether or not a particular solution purporting to do a specific function can and actually will deliver quite in line with what's being described there. So I just wanted to add that, Sue, and sorry to take your time up.
No, that's absolutely fine, and it's good to hear, because that's how we feel about it, and I hope that's been very useful to people as well. And I know we're running over, and that's because we've had a lot of questions and a lot of good discussion. But I thank you for your honest contributions, everyone, and don't forget all the questions that have been submitted, and some quite technical ones about Kobe and stuff like that. We will be sharing them with the panel after the session and making sure that we get answers for you, and they'll all be published on the forum. And so join the forum using the link on the screen, and then you'll be able to see everyone's answers as well. So that's really appreciated. That's extremely helpful. Now we're going to move on very briefly to what's coming next, because this is obviously an ongoing project. Here are a couple of things that we're working on, and it's worth remembering that apart from the small team running things, everything we do is done by volunteers, people like you. So we welcome your support and involvement. Okay, and the first thing is that Toolkit has been used for over a year, and I know there have been some questions about best practice and what other people are doing. And one of the things people always want to hear about is case studies, genuine use cases of the tools, and of BIM in housing in general. And we wanted to collect those stories, but we wanted to do it properly. Firstly, we wanted to make sure that if we did publish case studies, they were genuinely useful to other people and weren't just marketing. And secondly, we wanted to learn about what people were doing with the toolkit, what their concerns were and what they needed, so that we could continue to improve what has been done for users. So we're in the process of commissioning some research into how the toolkit is being received and how it's being used, and so that we can make it better and publish case studies as well. The working title for this project is Culture Change Study, but we're studying the culture change of valuing information management, if you like. So if you're using the toolkit, we will really need your help, because your experience is really valuable to us, and we really are past this concept stage now. It's important that we all get on and do it. I think you said to me yesterday, Jack, there are no more experts, because an expert is someone who claims that they are doing it because they are doing it. So you're the experts, guys. It doesn't happen without you. So we'll be in touch about this project. If you're on the forum, we will be, if we have your email address because you're on the forum, we will be in touch with you about that. But you can also email us direct using the link on the screen. I shall put that in the chat as well. And the second thing is that we're looking to get your support for. It's probably the biggest project we've done so far, but it is very important. We know that many providers have find that they're deluged with information from contractors and from their development teams, and we've heard that today. The reason for this is that contractors don't know what they should provide in granular detail, so they give you everything they think you might want, which is a bit of a problem, and it's not ideal, really. So if we can go for less is more, you can get more value out of the information that you get. Now, we already have a baseline of information that's needed in terms of that component list, which is in the Kobe spreadsheet in the toolkit. What we haven't done is identify what information about those components is of use to asset management. The attributes, for example, what information you need about doors or windows or boilers or heating systems or sprinkler systems. So we've begun to produce a data dictionary, and we've already done a pilot on doors, and that's published in the toolkit. It's actually published on the OSCA website, which is where the Housing Association data standards are published, and there's a link in the toolkit within an introductory document there. And we've already got a significant amount of funding for this project from 2 major housing associations, but we need more funding. It is supported by the Building Research Establishment and Data Clan, who helped with the asset information model. So the project is underway, but if you want to get involved in the workshops for it, there is a PDF with information in the toolkit, or again, you can email us on the link, which I shall put in the chat properly now. There we are. And we'll get you on the list to participate in workshops, and that includes your asset managers and your building safety managers who want to learn more about information management, because it's a really good ground for that. And now I think Jack's going to say something a bit about supporting our work.
I will, and I just wanted to rewind very quickly to that data dictionary, and there was a question that somebody had asked on, is a toolkit, it was an anonymous question that previous 2 speakers was about high-rise residential buildings, and is a toolkit applicable to that? And we said yes, it is, but it's actually very important to give more detail to the asset information requirements, the COBE sheet that you mentioned, so what you need to do to these things. So that means, in a specific example, an automatic opening vent is not going to be in a bungalow. It's not going to be in, a terraced house, but it will be in a high rise, and the data dictionary will define the things that we need to know, the specific things that are relevant to that asset and automatic opening vent. And this project, I think, is a really great way to get those subject matter experts who might be, your mechanical engineer or your facilities manager, to get them to understand the wider data picture and how COBE works and how BIM works, and harvesting that. So really, really interesting sessions with the teams that are working on that. But, rewinding, or actually fast forwarding to where we're supposed to be, is about what we do, and, what BIM for Housing Associations is, what we're about. And I mentioned it before that we're by housing association for housing associations. We don't accept advertisements or anything like that. We do have some costs, and this is the sort of embarrassing part where we need probably some help. And if you find the toolkits useful, any nickel, dime, or £1,000, a lot of contributing members have been able to donate up to £10,000, and that's to keep the wheels turning on all the projects and all the coordination work. Although the outputs are delivered by volunteers, we need to coordinate them, write down what people say in workshops, and then Sue does a tremendous job of communicating on our behalf and really keeping our program on track. So it's about the administration of the forum, keeping people informed, publishing things, and doing communications. That's just the bare minimum, and we can really require some help. And one of the things that we do have a pot of money for the data dictionary. It's pretty substantial, but it's earmarked for that. And we and just another thing is like, who keeps our money and who manages it? The National Housing Federation has generously offered their bank account, and they keep track of our funds. We don't hold anything. I don't want anything. So it's pretty skeletal operation, but it's we think that we're doing some important work, and the fact that people are here and listening and stuff, I hope is really useful to you. If you can help, it'd be really great, and reach out to Sue directly if that's something that you might be able to facilitate.
Thanks very much, Jack. Thank you. So it only remains to thank you very much for participating in the webinar today. I'd like to thank all our contributors, Aman, Beth, Jack, Kirsty, Sue and Femi, and everyone who's been involved in making and supporting the toolkit this year. We couldn't do it without you. And thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, everybody.